Welcome to the Filmlings Podcast,
a weekly podcast where we analyze all that goes into effective filmmaking.
I'm Jonathan.
And I'm Alex.
And this is week 14, Samurai and Sombreros, Volume 2. It's back.
That's right, it's back. Round 2. We couldn't leave it alone.
We couldn't, and it's not over yet either. Maybe not exactly in this form, but stay tuned.
Right, this story of co-influences between Western and Eastern cultures, Japanese and American films, influencing each other and adapting to each other, sometimes getting sued by each other, has not stopped ever. But this is a really interesting period in time to compare these two. And this week we get to go head-to-head with two fantastic filmmakers, Kurosawa again and Leone.
Yeah, so this is going to be pretty fun. We did, for those of you just tuning in, a couple weeks ago, we did Samurai and Sombreros, the first one, which was Seven Samurai by Akira Kurosawa and The Magnificent Seven by John Sturges. But this week we get Kurosawa versus Leone, and Leone is such a great filmmaker that these two films really can and have held their heads high in cinematic history for many, many decades.
Yeah, so Yojimbo is a 1961 film from Kurosawa, so it's about 5 years after Seven Samurai.
Actually, 1 year after The Magnificent Seven, so we're kind of riding right on the coattails of our last episode.
Yeah, and this is also during that really hot period in Kurosawa's career where he was just turning out hit after hit after hit, and definitely improving from each one to each one. But this is also, while it's kind of another Jidaigeki film, another period piece, it's less about sword fighting, and it's a little more about social commentary. And as we'll explore in this podcast, it's definitely a dark comedy as well. I'm always shocked about how much I laugh at this movie.
It's much funnier than Seven Samurai. Seven Samurai was much more dramatic. And also more dramatic is A Fistful of Dollars, which is a remake of Yojimbo, although not credited as such, which has some implications that we'll talk about. From 1964, and it takes the same story, puts it in the West, give it Clint Eastwood, and it still has some humor, but it's definitely not a comedic film. And it is actually the first, considered the first spaghetti Western, so it was the kickoff of an entire genre that we're still seeing implications from. And it's also Leone's second film and first to get a lot of recognition, I think. So we're seeing the kickoff of a genre and a director's career, a great director's career. But that all started with Yojimbo. So do you want to talk to us about the basic story of Yojimbo?
Yeah, so Yojimbo takes place in 1860 during the final years of the Tokugawa shogunate in Japan. So there's a lot of turmoil in the country. The government's more or less falling apart. The countryside is basically falling under self-jurisdiction. And a big part of that is there's wandering samurai about, and gangs controlling towns. And that's what we're dealing with in this movie. Our protagonist of the film, Sanjuro, or in this episode in his series, Kuobataki Sanjuro, which means 30-year-old mulberry field. He always names himself after whatever kind of field he's looking at whenever somebody asks him his name. So he's essentially... He
just makes it up.
Yeah, he's the samurai with no name, which, as we'll see, is a parallel to the Dollars trilogy. So Sanjuro arrives in one of these towns that is being controlled by two rival gangs. One is run by a family, a father, his wife, and their son, who run a brothel. They were the original gang in the town, but the leader of that gang was betrayed by a lieutenant who formed a second gang, which we'll refer to as the Three Brothers Gang, which is run by three brothers. One who's a bit older and wiser, one who is a bit of an idiot, and one who is kind of like this dangerous snake-like gunslinger. Has the only gun in the entire film because it's 1860 Japan.
Sadistic.
Yeah, that for sure. And each of these gangs is allied with a mayor of the town. The original gang, the family gang.
Quotes around mayor.
Yeah, air quotes around mayor. The original gang is allied with the original mayor of the town, who is a silk merchant, but is definitely involved in their illegal activities. And then the second gang, the Brothers Gang, is allied with a winemaker, a sake maker, who is also declared himself mayor of the town. So it's a split town. It's basically chaos. Both gangs are hiring street thugs to work for them. And Sanjuro walks into this town, and he more or less takes it upon himself to clear the town of both gangs.
And he has a line at the beginning of the film that's like, I get paid to kill people, and there's a lot of people here that deserve to die. So that kind of sets the tone for the rest of the movie.
Yeah. It's interesting. And we'll get into his interest in money and his interest in being a good person later on. But we should mention that the title Yojimbo means bodyguard in Japanese.
Yeah.
And he goes back and forth offering his services between these two.
Although he does this pretty much with the express purpose of pitting them against each other. He's basically a chess player of sorts, where he makes his moves very specifically to get a reaction from one side or the other.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot of the interest in the film doesn't come from fighting, but so much as these strategical political moves that he and the two gangs make to play off one of another, and the individual people within each gang to vie for power or vie for respect or vie for their lives, depending on who we're talking about. But we should also mention a few of the townsfolk, because we don't see many townsfolk.
Yeah, so there are definitely some important players who are not necessarily associated with either gang. We have the constable, which I believe is the first character that we find, besides one of the thugs, who's not that important. But the constable is the most cowardly of probably anyone in the town. He's always kind of hopping around, and he calls out the time and stuff for everybody, and he just watches and hides in his little house whenever stuff is going down. And then there's also the barkeep. Basically, he runs the little restaurant in town, but no one really eats there, and so they mostly just go there to drink. And he is very adverse to our Sanjuro character staying in town because he knows what a bad place it is, and he's like, just move on, don't even bother being here. And he wants everyone to stop fighting. And then right next to him works the casket maker, they call him in this. And he is kind of the opposite. He wants the fighting to keep going because that's what keeps his business running. So it's funny because we have these two opposing sides who are the best friends of Sanjuro, and so they're constantly the fighting is starting up again. Oh man, and then oh yes. So it's like that back and forth kind of thing.
Yeah. So the first family he goes to is the gang run.
After he gets a brief rundown of what's going on in the city from the barkeeper.
Right. So after that, there's a fairly iconic scene where he calls out both gangs and then cuts down 3 members of the brothers gang very easily. But after doing that, he goes to the gang run by the original mob boss in the town, run by the family of the husband, wife, and son. And he asked this family for money, a lot of money, by the way.
Yeah.
He even insults the former head fighter of that family who runs away and gives him a knowing look as he jumps over the wall, like, I know what you're up to. A really great scene to kind of set the comedic tone for the film that travels alongside these dark political moves.
Yeah, real quickly, I just wanted to mention that the way that this is set up is pretty brilliant because all the money in the town is paid through Rios. And if you don't know what that is, that's fine because we didn't either. But the way that it's set up is brilliant. He offers him, what is it? He starts off at 2 Rios, 2 or 3.
Yeah, he offers him 3 and works him up to like 50.
Yeah, and then Sanjuro threatens to leave, and he's like walking out. He's like, no, 4. Oh, no, 5. And he's like, add a 0 to that. Sanjuro says that. And so he eventually works him up to 50, but just through that, like the fact that we started at 3 and we get up to 50 tells us how much money that is. Because otherwise, if he had just been like, all right, 50, we wouldn't have felt the weight of, okay, this is a pricey deal going on.
Yeah, because I don't know about you, but I don't have my modern American dollars to
Ancient
1860s Japanese Rios conversions down. I don't have that memorized. So that's a really good way to set it up. And that's essentially what Sanjuro does over the course of the film is play off these families off one another by threatening to go to the other side unless he's paid more. And then he barely does any fighting over the course of the movie. But he does get to meet this family at the beginning. And we do want to mention that the father he's a decent crime boss, but he's a bit of a pushover. And the wife is really overbearing.
Yeah, she's kind of the one calling the shots, and the husband is a little bit of a figurehead. Not totally, but like the first time we see the wife, the husband is meeting with Sanjuro, and then she comes in and is like, we got to talk. And then he's like, oh, she's such a crazy wench. And he's like, I'll be right back. And he just leaves.
Yeah, you know who's actually running the gang. And then their son is supposed to be the heir to the family business, but he's a total wimp, not up to the task, and his parents are definitely overbearing on him over the course of the film to try to get his act together. But the reason we're diving into these characters in such detail, more than we normally do, for all the characters that you see in a film, is the way that Kurosawa builds a character on screen is really distinct and really heightened. It's more than your average physical presence on screen, I think is the best way to put it. It's just so interesting to watch them move on screen, and Kurosawa is really big on motion, but he likes to give each character kind of their own signature trait, their own specific thing that they do that makes them stick out, and it works really well in this film.
Yeah, especially in this one because it's like we already said, more comedic, and there are almost some points that are overly comedic on a sort of cartoonish level. And I don't want to say cartoonish because it's not like silly or low level humor, but it's like you were saying, that over the topness where and we'll get into this in a little bit, like the music kind of accents what's going on in a way that, you know, if Bugs Bunny were tiptoeing around, the music would be do 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 do. The music kind of does that in this too at some points, and that's also how some of these character choices work.
Yeah, it's got that heightened, punched up theatrical vibe to it, where you kind of almost feel like they're playing to the back of the house.
Right. The one of note is Sanjuro's, I guess, character tick, if you will, is he kind of shakes his shoulders. I don't know how to describe it. Yeah, the best way to describe it probably is that Kurosawa asked him or told Mifune that the character was kind of based on like a wolf
or dog, which in
Stray dog.
a stray dog, which in the context of the film makes sense because he's just kind of wandering around looking for a meal at the beginning of the film.
Yeah, there's actually a line also whenever he first meets the brothers gang, all the little henchmen come out and they're egging him on and they're like, come on, go on your way. Even stray dogs pass freely. And then everyone laughs like that's the most hilarious thing ever.
Yeah.
But that kind of sets him up immediately as this stray dog. And also there's another dog at the beginning.
There's a literal dog. Yep.
A literal dog that, as he's walking into the town, the first thing we know about the town is this dog coming out with a human hand in its mouth. And we're like, oh, okay. So that's what we're getting into.
Yeah. That's their way of saying this is the bad town to be in. Is when you see dogs walking around with hands. Well, not their hands. It's not. They have paws, but they have. He has like a human hand in his mouth that's been severed, and is now in the dog's mouth. But I digress. Toshiro Mifune developed this shoulder shrug, kind of like he's flicking off fleas. Is how I read it, how it was described to me, and it does look like that, and it's a pretty signature move, especially considering the opening shot of the movie is like it's pretty long. It's a few minutes long, and for most of it we're behind Sanjuro as he's walking along this road, and we get to
while all the
see him
credits
like
are
kind of
going.
do like these shoulder rolls and these shoulder flicks, and that's how we get to see him enter the town. And typically if he's doing that, like stuff's about to go down. So it's a nice character trait. It sticks out. It sticks in your head, and helps define the character and stick them out in this kind of theatrical way that Kurosawa builds these worlds.
Yeah, and real quick, while we're on that opening shot, one of the first things we see after all the opening credits finish is Sanjuro picks up a stick and throws it into the air, and then it lands because he's come to a fork in the road, and wherever there's one side that has like a fork in it, lands, and then we see his feet literally kind of echo the stick, and he walks in that direction, and it's just a perfect silent cue that he doesn't know where he's going. It doesn't matter. He's stray. He's just walking around, trying to pick a path, but he doesn't really have any direction. It's just that one choice of tossing a stick, basically flipping a coin, gives us a lot of character information without him ever telling anyone, I don't have anywhere to be. I don't have a master. I'm just wandering.
Yeah, and the other character trait I really want to mention is the youngest brother of the brothers gang, who's turns into the main antagonist of the film, and the only one kind of smart enough to deal with Sanjuro, as he's out tricking all of these other kind of, I guess, stupid villains and criminals that he's dealing with. But anyway, the youngest brother is named Unosake, and he returns halfway through the movie. He's not even there from the first half. But when he returns, he comes with a gun, and that's the big threat from him, is that he's smart and he has an advanced weapon.
That was kind of the mystical threat in Seven Samurai too, was the firepower in a mostly agrarian setting, and then with swords as the available for hire people, I guess.
Yeah. When the weaponry was still kind of medieval, but someone's walking in with a 19th century firearm,
a long distance weapon.
Yeah. That's a big step up. And it's a big threat.
Raises the stakes immediately. Yeah,
and he has a kind of similar trait that kind of echoes Sanjuro's trait. And for starters, they both keep their hands like inside their robes for most of the time, which seems weird to me and disconcerting, but it does connect the two characters, which I think works well since they're rivals or arch enemies.
I was always worried,
but they're enemies.
Yeah. I was worried that Sanjuro wouldn't be able to get his arms out fast enough and grab his sword at like several points.
I think
like,
that's
just take your arms out.
yeah, and I think that's the point. I think it's supposed to trick both the audience and the other characters in the film into underestimating him to a certain degree, and then suddenly, oh my gosh, he's super deadly with his
Right.
sword out and about. But Unosaki, instead of using a sword, uses a gun, and he kind of just pokes the gun out from in between the rope. He doesn't even use the sleeve. He just goes through the middle and pokes his gun out and has this really creepy, wide-eyed smile. And from what I've been able to find, it sounds like Kurosawa mostly based that character off of a snake. And that imagery kind of works with the idea of a snake with that big open mouth smile, creepy eyes, and like the gun kind of slithers out from the robe to become a threat that could strike from a distance. And it kind of works.
I'm interested though, because I understand it whenever you hear it described that way. But when you watched it before you knew that, did it seem like just a strange choice to you?
It seemed off-putting, but it made sense.
Awkward.
But it made sense that it was off-putting, because I thought of the character as he's kind of a psychopath. Like he looks like a psychopath. In the way he expresses his face and acts towards the other characters. So the fact that he's like babying this gun inside of his robe and then kind of like poking it out like that. At first it seemed weird, but I think it makes sense as you watch it that this is just who this character is like he's kind of a weird guy. But he's a dangerous guy.
Yeah, but here's the other thing about it is that I believe we see Sanjuro do it first. But he doesn't have a gun in his robe, but he'll stick his hand up through the center of his tunic and kind of rub his chin or whatever. And that seemed weird to me at first too, and then Unosaki was doing it. So I don't know. I almost kind of felt, I don't know if it's him trying to identify those two characters again, but I think it may have worked best if, Unosaki was the only one who did that throughout the film, because I noticed it on both accounts and I was a little confused.
I do like the fact that they keep it inside the ropes a lot of the times, because it kind of connects the two of them. And I also like the fact that when Unosaki does it, it's a threat, and when Sanjuro does it, it's just to scratch his face.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so while we're talking more detailed about the brothers' characteristics, the middle brother, whose name is Inokichi, he is our primary comic relief. He kind of hangs around Sanjuro a lot because he thinks he's tough and cool, and he thinks that he's tough and cool, and so he wants to be around him. But he's an idiot.
That's putting it mildly.
Yeah, that's putting it mildly. And we mentioned in Seven Samurai, I think, that Kurosawa was heavily influenced by Shakespeare. And even in Shakespeare's darkest dramas, he has that element of comic relief. And Unosaki is definitely that for us. So we get this, he puts on this macho persona, but he really can't live up to it. So there's a great... The best example of this that I could think of is at some point the barkeeper is asking him to carry a casket down to the graveyard, and he's like, no, I'm not going to bother with that. I've got more important things to do. But he really needs him to help him. So the barkeeper says, oh, okay, well, are you too scared of a dead man in this casket? And he goes, what did you call me? No, I'm not scared of anything. He's like, okay, where are we taking this thing? And the barkeeper says, we're going down to the graveyard. I think I saw some ghosts over there. And he says, oh, well, I'd be relieved to see some ghosts. And so he goes off thinking he's going to be all tough and face down some ghosts. But you can see the knee-jerk reaction of fear that he has kind of betrays his real character.
Yeah, for sure. And definitely also just the design of the character Like his appearance
Oh,
on
yeah, his
screen,
look.
it kind of gives away that he's the comic relief. They gave him a big fake unibrow and these
Hopefully
buck teeth.
fake. We're praying it's fake.
Yeah. I hope it's. I mean, this isn't just even like a standard unibrow. This is like an obscene
Bushy.
unibrow. Like I don't think anybody can grow a unibrow like this. I think it's humanly impossible. It has to be fake.
And on IMDb, the character is described as Ushitura's rotund brother. So if that doesn't
clearly
give you
set up
enough,
to be the comic relief. But it's interesting because if you take a step back and think about what's happening in the movie Yojimbo, you
just
have
from a
these,
logistical standpoint.
yeah, it's these dark political moves where people are being killed, and it's these crime gangs going up against
raped
each other
and kidnapped.
yeah, it's really dark. But there's also like a lot of humor over the course of the movie, which I think is one of the things that makes it a fun movie, which it really is. It's a fun movie to watch.
Yeah, it's a really interesting blend, and like I was saying, it's almost Shakespearean in the way that, except for it's almost more Shakespearean comedy just in its general sense. When you leave with kind of, a more light mood than a dark and depressed one. And it's just this fact that these dark things are almost the backdrop to the comedy and to the social commentary about class systems and the stupidity of gang wars and feuds and all this kind of stuff.
And of course, we can't talk about Yojimbo without talking about violence, because it's a samurai film and there's swords and there's blood and there's killing. But the most interesting thing about the violence is not that it exists, but that it's depicted in different ways throughout the movie. It's not just
it's like different levels
throughout.
of gore.
Yeah, so sometimes, somebody's arm will get cut off and we'll see gushing fountains of blood in black and white, which I always think is slightly different, but it's definitely still
and like
gushing
for a
fountains
second,
of blood.
but
Yeah. And then other times when there's a fairly large arc in the film, I should mention, where there's a wife of one of the farmers of the village has been kidnapped by the mayor affiliated with the Three Brothers gang, and eventually Sanjuro saves her. And when he saves her, he kills the 6 bodyguards assigned to protect her. And it's really not that gory of a scene. You see him cut him down, but you don't see spurts of blood. You don't see limbs cut off. You just see people hit with a prop sword and they fall. And it's still a really good scene. In fact, it was copied basically exactly.
Yeah, almost
in a
shot for
fistful
shot.
of dollars, but it's just not that bloody, which I think at least is kind of it's Kurosawa choosing when to emphasize the violence and when to emphasize the motive behind the violence. So that moment where Sanjuro is cutting down a couple thugs in the street, and we see blood spurting everywhere, we're emphasizing the fact that he has this violent capability and he's a threat to these
And
gangs.
the skill, yeah.
And his skill. But when we see him cut down the bodyguards, that whole arc is kind of about revealing his deeper character motives, and that he's actually he's a decent human being. He's a good person. He's putting his whole entire plan at risk of destroying these gangs by trying to save this woman and reunite this family. And he even at the end of it gives them like all of his earnings up to that point, which is I can't remember how much. It's like 30 Rios or something. It's a buttload of Rios.
What that one was he found out about the whole kidnapping the wife thing. He goes to the gang that did it, says, "I'm going to be your bodyguard. Give me 30 Rios," and then goes and kills all the guards and then gives him the 30 that he had just got from them.
Yeah, which is
But that's all
some
he had at that
poetic
point because
justice.
he had been giving him back. Yeah, it was perfect.
Yeah, but that scene, that violent scene where he's killing those guards, is not about the violence he's committing, but it's about the motive behind the act. The fact that he's risking his entire plan to save this family that he doesn't need to save.
It's like the most altruistic thing he does, most purely altruistic action that he takes.
Which also says something about the movie, that his most pure action is killing 6 people.
That's a good part. I didn't even think about that.
Let's not forget about that. But it definitely is a selective use of violence, which I think is really interesting. And, maybe that wasn't authorial intent. I think with Kurosawa, I'm willing to bet a lot of money that it was.
Yeah, it may have been.
But regardless, it has a great effect.
Budget and logistic issues also.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I feel like so many budget and logistic issues in the past century of film have been chalked up to an artistic intent. After the fact.
It's hard to differentiate sometimes, but if it works for the movie, then it's something that we can draw from, because even if it wasn't put there intentionally, you could still be inspired by that and kind of take the same idea and apply that to another movie later on as an intentional choice, rather than so you don't let it just become
that's like the first rule of filmmaking. If you did something on accident that people like, pretend you did it on purpose.
Yeah, don't contradict them.
Just roll with it.
Yeah, and the last thing we want to talk about specifically about Yojimbo in this non-spoiler section is the fact that, and we mentioned this in Seventh Samurai, I believe, but Kurosawa was heavily influenced by Western film and by Westerns as a movie genre. So the fact that this film, after he had gotten some recognition for his feudal era films, it now comes as like one of the articles that we read this week basically said this is Akira Kurosawa saying, all right, well, let me show you just how Western I can be in my filmmaking, speaking culturally, but also specifically as a film genre. It is literally set up like a Western. There's wind blowing and dust rolling in and leaves tumbling by like tumbleweed, and this little town where people are, hiding behind their shutters and stuff and afraid of the big bad fighters on either side and stuff. So it's set up as an influence from Western films. So that means that it's perfectly set up to be adapted into a literal Western film.
Right. And, that brings up another point about Kurosawa that I think I want to finish off this analysis with on Yojimbo before we transition over, is that maybe because he was so influenced by the West is one of the reasons why he is such a successful Japanese director in the West. Rashomon basically busted open Japanese film to the entire Western audience. And he, throughout the years, has remained probably the most popular Japanese live action director in the West. And I think that's one of the reasons why he sticks with us, is because he took so many Western influences into his filmmaking. Is that it still seems different to us, but there's still familiar elements in it that we can connect with. So when we watch Yojimbo, we're like, this is really cool, but you know what? This reminds me of a Western. So it seems different because it's in a different culture, all those reasons, but it still has a ring of familiarity because of the influences that went into it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and so with that point, we're going to move on along to the same story, but in a Western with A Fistful of Dollars from 1964. And Jonathan, do you want to take us into that one?
Absolutely. So A Fistful of Dollars is And I won't go through the whole story because, like we said, it takes the story from Yojimbo and puts it into a Western setting. So a cowboy rides up to a town, and the town is held by two warring factions. So one is the Rojos, and they smuggle alcohol. So both gangs are smuggling things to Americans who can buy it cheaply and then bring it back to the United States and sell it for more. So the Rojos are smuggling alcohol, and the Baxters on the other side are smuggling guns and arms. So it's kind of interesting, though, the way that this film starts is we start with seeing two little kind of cottages, and a little boy runs out and runs to one and goes in, and then is promptly chased out by some large men with guns who are shooting at his feet, telling him to run back to the other house. And a man from the other house comes out and grabs him, and then we see a woman in the house that the boy had run to stand at the window, which has bars around it, and look out at them. And so we're kind of set up right at the beginning with this family drama that we had seen in Yojimbo, but which was only even mentioned halfway through the film. So that's one difference as far as the setup for the story and the characters goes. We're immediately faced with our no-name character, who is called alternatively the Americano and Joe throughout the film by different characters. But Joe sees this happening, and so he's already, kind of taking this in that, okay, something in this town is not right.
Yeah, and of course, we have another legendary actor playing the protagonist. But at this point, not quite that legendary. This is kind of the start of something.
Baby Eastwood.
Yeah, he plays the man with no name. That would become infamous. He's very similar to Sanjuro, if maybe definitely more motivated by money. And later on, we kind of get to see that he has some inner heart that he reveals, but he doesn't have a line where he talks about how he can. There's a lot of people here who need killing, and I can kill them. Like he's gonna cleanse the town or anything. He has the line where he talks about there's the Rojos over there, the Baxters over there, and there's me in the middle, and I'm gonna make a lot of money, essentially.
Yeah,
that's his goal. So that brings a slightly new vibe to the film, and it definitely leads to a different tone when we get to certain scenes that we'll go into in more detail here. But he still has a lot of similarities to Sanjuro, and it's just adapted really well. So instead of wearing a traditional Japanese robe that a samurai would wear, he's wearing a poncho, which kind of has the same flowy vibe, and he kind of flicks it occasionally in the same way that Sanjuro flicks his shoulders. In that whole I'm a stray dog flicking off fleas kind of vibe.
Except for Joe, it's whenever he's about to shoot his gun. So when he flicks that thing, stuff's about to go down.
Yeah, which is the same thing with Sanjuro. Like typically when he's, except to a lesser extent, because he doesn't always kill right after it. He just
he does it as
does
he's
it
walking.
when he's tense.
Right.
But he's kind of the same character. He's this hardened criminal. I think they describe it really well in this movie. He's a nice guy pretending not to be nice.
Right.
He's really good with a gun. He's super smart and super dangerous, and maybe a little too ambitious, but definitely a good adaptation, like a better than good adaptation from Yojimbo to A Fistful of Dollars, keeping the heart of the character, but changing certain parts of him just enough to make him feel slightly unique.
Yeah, and they do some plot changes and stuff that kind of set up characters better. Like, so one thing about this film is that it takes these dark things that happen in Yojimbo and it kind of shows us how dark they actually are. Like, we feel the weight of them more, and it's less about the comedy and the social commentary and more kind of straight, I guess. Like, we're seeing a lot of people dying, and that's not a funny thing. But just to kind of give us an overview of some of our major players, the barkeeper, it has some character changes in him. He's still our Joe's like best friend in the town, kind of a guy, almost henchman, but he's much more interested in what Joe is doing. He's not moping all the time about how everyone's fighting. He actually like is like, hey, wait for me. I want to see what you're gonna get yourself into.
Like, this is the only interesting thing that's happened in this town in a decade.
Right, exactly.
I want to go see. Yeah.
He doesn't like the fighting, but he's not saying, "Oh my gosh, I just wish the town would stop fighting." And then the casket maker is actually somewhat less of a character in this one.
Yeah, he's just crazy.
He has a big role, but he's kind of the loony old man in town. He's hilarious, though. I loved him. And then as far as the brothers, so the brothers gang, as we called them in Yojimbo, those are the Rojos in this one, and they're the alcohol smugglers. And there's no stupid brother. They're all pretty ruthless. And we can see that really blatantly in the way that the equivalent of the brother who had gone off and came back with a pistol, and that was kind of the big threat in town. His equivalent in this film, the first thing that we see of this character, whose name is Ramon, he's the intimidating one that everyone talks about before we see him, is that part of their gang had intercepted a group of U.S. soldiers and killed them and stolen their clothes, and then rode up to meet with a group of Mexican soldiers to do a gold and guns trade. And then he just literally mows down the entire group of Mexican soldiers with a machine gun.
It's a Gatling gun.
Yeah, with a Gatling, and it's just brutal. So that's kind of... And then we also get this scene of one of the soldiers gets up and gets on a horse and tries to run away. He's the last one. And Ramon takes this rifle that he has, his Winchester, that's his specialized weapon, and he shoots him as he's running away. So Joe's watching all this and with his barkeeper friend, and that's our first indication of how skilled Ramon is, and sets up him as the anti Joe, they're going to be the two skillful fighter characters that go throughout the film.
Yeah, and the other gang in this movie is a little bit different too. The Baxter family, which is the family gang from Yojimbo. It's the one led by a husband, a wife, and a son. Except the wife is the one who's really running things. She's in charge. A little less volatile than in Yojimbo. Like, they're not actually beating each other. The son isn't kind of like the simpering child. He's kind of quiet. You don't really get much out of him.
He's still not macho. And the wife isn't overbearing. It seems more mutual between the wife and husband a little bit.
Yeah, she's definitely like running things though. Like, right. You can tell. But I think the most interesting thing is that where in Yojimbo, the two gangs are fairly equal. In A Fistful of Dollars.
In terms of terribleness.
Yeah, in terms of terribleness, in terms of strength for most of the film. In A Fistful of Dollars, the Baxters just kind of get kicked around for most of the movie. They're the ones who have their... who the protagonist kills a few of their men right at the start to prove a point that he's valuable and worth hiring. Which,
before he knows anything about either of them.
Yeah, which, by the way, he kills in Yojimbo. Sanjuro kills 3 people to start off the film. In A Fistful of Dollars, Joe kills 4. I'm just saying, I think that's some one-upmanship by Leone.
I will say that it's kind of funny if you go into this film expecting it to be like Yojimbo. There's as he's walking up to do this this little killing show of power, he tells the casket maker, get three coffins ready. And so we're like, okay, we know what's coming. And then he kills 4 of them, and as he's walking back, he's like, my bad, make that 4 coffins. So they kind of set it up like, oh yeah, I remember this in Yojimbo. He killed 3 of their guys. And then you're like, oh, he got another one.
Yeah. And as the film progresses, the Baxters just get stomped on more and more and more. And
they never really do anything all that terrible that we see anyway.
No. They're definitely not great people. They're gun smugglers who are doing some illegal stuff, but they don't seem to
instigate the feud.
Yeah, they don't seem to instigate the feud. They don't seem to be kidnapping any of the villagers' wives. Nothing like that.
And there's actually a line that Ramon has where he says, the Baxters just want peace, so we'll let them have it for a little while because they were planning something else for later. But, I mean, even the other gang knows that the Baxters don't want to be fighting in the way that they are.
Yeah. And the result is that you end up with this much more sympathetic view of the gang than you do in Yojimbo. And at least I think the reason for that is to kind of help villainize the Rojos. So when the Rojos are attacking the Baxters at any point in the movie, sure, you're not
specifically one point,
which we won't mention in the spoiler-free section. You just feel bad for the Baxters because you don't see them. They're not even running a brothel. They're just trying to be honest gun smugglers, as honest as gun smugglers can be. And that makes the Rojos brothers, who are just, killing people left and right over the course of the film, seem that much worse, which in turn makes Joe, who's opposing the Rojos brothers, that much more of a hero. And in fact, there's several points throughout the movie where Joe works with the Baxters to visit some kind of malady on the Rojos. And a lot of that is the fact that Joe is just playing them off each other like Sanjuro did.
Yeah, but it feels less like he's intentionally trying to pit each side against each other in this one, and more like he's just trying to do what's most advantageous for him, right?
Yeah, and that's definitely the outlook of this film, is that the protagonist is out to make money, hence the name. But in Yojimbo, Sanjuro is trying to get everybody in both gangs killed and free the town of everybody present who's causing problems, not so much in A Fistful of Dollars. And I think the sympathetic presentation of the Baxters kind of helps that along.
Yeah, and as long as we're talking about, vilification and stuff like that, we have to talk about the violence and the ways that we see that played out. And like we were talking about with Yojimbo, this film also has moments where Joe or anyone really is shooting at people and they're kind of falling over with they don't have squibs or anything like gushing. But then there's other moments where we have people being beat up in a more hand combat and kind of physical torture kind of a situation. And there's a lot of blood and a lot of brutal, beat up makeup on Joe's face, and it's way, I don't know if it's worse or more striking because it's in color or because the makeup was just worse. worse as in more dramatic. But yeah, this film felt more violent, even though it follows the same plot points. There are a lot of points that we're going to get to right here in a second when we get to overall, because a lot of the most violent points are spoilers, but those points that we see the most violence are kind of drawn out and not skipped over in A Fistful of Dollars, whereas, you know, certain scenes were kind of glossed over in Yojimbo, or were framed up differently so that, like you were saying, we didn't care about either side particularly much. So if people are being killed, we don't care about them, whereas in this one we definitely do. So with that, let's get into overall notes and talk through some specific things that happen near the end. So for anyone who has not seen these films, we do encourage you to pause now and go watch them, because it will be well worth your time. But with that, let's talk about some of the ending stuff, Alex.
Yeah, so the big thing that we didn't want to give away in the spoiler-free section was the scene in each of the films where the Three Brothers gang massacres the other gang completely. They kill everybody, including the main family, the husband, wife, and son.
Yeah, and
both
they do.
Films.
It's not like a set-up fight and they just win. It's they go to their house and burn it down and kill everyone as they're coming out.
Oh yeah, it's super brutal. It's very brutal. But the way it feels brutal is different in both films. I would say in Yojimbo, it feels more like a continuation of the escalating violence that was happening up to that point between both gangs, because they both, they were both hating each other pretty hard. They were destroying each other's economic buildings. They were attacking each other in the streets,
capturing and killing henchmen, and
exactly, yeah. But in A Fistful of Dollars, like we were talking about with the Baxters feeling a little more sympathetic, one of the big reasons why, besides the fact that they don't randomly visit violence upon the townsfolk, which we never see, by the way. You never see any of the townsfolk. They're just implied.
Yeah, especially in A Fistful of Dollars.
Especially in A Fistful of Dollars, yeah. But when the Baxters are killed, they haven't done anything wrong in the eyes of the audience. So as they come out and are like tragically slaughtered to a man, first the dad, then the son, then the mother, you feel really bad for them. And then on the reverse, there are these really like red, fiery, lit up close-ups of each of the brothers as they're shooting at the people who come out, and it basically makes them look like devils.
Yeah, and they're laughing hysterically. And one of the other like big differences with this scene is that in Yojimbo, as all the thugs from the gang are coming out of the smoking house, and it's just smoke in Yojimbo, it's not fire like it is in A Fistful of Dollars. But as they're coming out swinging. So their swords are going around, and then they kind of cut them down and stuff like that. So it feels slightly more like a fight. It's still an incredibly unfair fight. But in A Fistful of Dollars, the big change is that as all the henchmen are coming out, they're saying, "Don't shoot, we're unarmed, please don't shoot us." And then they just like keep gunning them down. And even the point whenever he kills the John Baxter, the head of the family, he's John Baxter is saying, "You can have all my territory, you can have everything, just let me live and I'll leave." And then Ramon starts saying something. He like almost goes into a bad guy monologue, and in the middle of a word he shoots him down. It was insane. It was like, "Do you promise? You have to promise to me. If you don't promise, then..." And you were like, "Oh, okay, well, I guess that's where we're going with this." And then the wife comes out and she's like, "Murderers, murderers," just kind of making them face what they're doing, and they shoot her down in the middle of it, and it just felt much more weighty than in Yojimbo.
Yeah, and kind of close to that whole discussion about violence between the two films. kind of also have to talk about humor, because those are the two main elements, the two big
dark
draws
comedy.
of a dark comedy, and these two films in particular have a lot of violence, and Yojimbo at least has a lot of humor. There's almost an emphasis on making sure that it didn't get too dark over the course of the film.
Lightheartedness, right?
Yeah. Whereas in A Fistful of Dollars, you don't really get there. There's a couple moments that are funny, but there's not that consistent drive to make light of certain situations, and you feel the gravity. It feels a lot more like a personal struggle than the political struggle in Sanjuro, where people can kind of step back from it and make light, or have a funny moment, or watch that idiot brother with the terrible makeup do something stupid, or something like that. And it gives them different tones. It makes A Fistful of Dollars feel heavier, almost more emotionally resonant, and it makes Yojimbo, at least I think, feel a little more intricate and a little more interesting in a certain way.
It's still thoughtful, but in a different way. Like I come away from Yojimbo with this kind of, okay, that was this interesting look at these characters in this town that was, tearing itself apart from the inside, and how one person can come in and kind of give an outside perspective and turn everything upside down. Whereas I remember the first time that I watched A Fistful of Dollars, I had seen The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and some other Westerns, but I walked away with it like, I cannot believe that film went that dark. Like, it seriously left me with a weight when I walked away from it. It's just very different. And I was not expecting this much humor in Yojimbo after, seeing Seven Samurai, which was more dramatic, probably more along the lines of A Fistful of Dollars tonally, and then knowing A Fistful of Dollars, I was not expecting the amount of humor that I got out of Yojimbo.
Yeah, it's definitely, it leaves you with the sense of enjoyment, like you had a fun time. And if you think about what happened in the movie, like some of the really, really bad stuff that happened, like all that murder and all that.
Yeah, and the rape was played up more in this one too.
Yeah, it's
actually, yeah, that's interesting that in Yojimbo they kind of emphasize. So one of the plot points that we've kind of mentioned is that the one of the people on the three brothers side, is that right? Yeah, is that one of the gang members on the three brothers side has kidnapped the wife of a family that was traveling through the town after the husband was gambling with him, and the wife ended up being a trading card that he loses. And they talk about how in Yojimbo, they talk about how he built a hut next to his old house that he also lost while gambling, just to be close there. But it's a constant reminder, as his wife is, they literally say that his wife is ravaged daily. Whereas that's not, it's kind of implied in A Fistful of Dollars, but it's not played up as much. The husband is not as much of a character, and it's still something that Joe goes and saves and reunites the family. But it's more of like a side point, I guess.
Yeah, and part of that could just be the fact that they were aiming for release in America eventually.
Yeah, so just tone down some of those things.
Yeah.
For Hays Code reasons.
Get those down, so you don't have too much of a problem with the ratings. Yeah. So it's implied. It's probably definitely there, but there's enough wiggle room in terms of how it's depicted in A Fistful of Dollars to get away with it with anybody who's watching.
Yeah, and also kind of, I guess, not spending as much time with the family, but still being able to set it up. Like we said, that's set up right at the beginning. So we know it's there throughout the whole thing, even if they don't dig into it quite as much. But the kind of stripping down is seen throughout the film for certain elements of Yojimbo. So, for example, in Yojimbo, there's a moment where the two clans are about to go to war, but then a horseman comes in and is like, the inspector's coming, because the town is about to hold a silk fair where they get a lot of their revenue. So the inspector had to come make sure that the town is ready and properly maintained. But mostly it was just to get bribes, because that's what we see when he comes. He has this lots of really nice things, and Sanjuro's like, this guy's a nobody. Why does he have so much stuff? And then we see the mayor and the constable coming out and giving him bribes. But all of that is kind of... Oh, and then in order... The tribes can't fight while the inspector is there. So the Three Brothers tribe sends some goons to go kill a magistrate in a neighboring town so that the inspector will leave and have to go deal with that. And then eventually the two goons are back in the town, and they talk to Sanjuro while drunk about what they did, and so they're used as bargaining chips and all this kind of stuff. And they eventually get killed off. And in A Fistful of Dollars, basically Joe takes two of the Mexican soldiers that have already been killed from Ramon's massacre when he's first set up, and literally just uses them as dummies, and tells each of the clans that there's these two guys out here that are going to talk about, what happened, how Ramon killed all these people and stuff. So he kind of sets them up to go meet each other and duel it out. But they're literally just dummies, so we don't take all this time with this character development of these two characters that are literally just exist to advance the plot. And the same goes with the constable from Yojimbo, who, like we said, he's cowering the whole time and all this stuff. His character is essentially or literally reduced to the bell ringer in the town in A Fistful of Dollars, where he's the first person we see. All he does is ring the bell, for the time and for certain events, and he tells us what the town is all about. His line at the beginning is, "You'll either end up rich here or you'll end up dead." And so that sets us up for the town, and then we really don't see him again until the very end when he rings the bell after everyone dies.
Right. And that kind of brings me to a point about these two films, and probably the reason why I like A Fistful of Dollars so much, not just as a movie, but as an adaptation or a remake. I'm not sure what you would label it as, except they didn't. But
they didn't label it at all.
Yeah, just we're in the spoiler section. We can bring that up now. Sergio Leone and all the people who made A Fistful of Dollars, none of them credited Kurosawa. And Kurosawa was quoted, I'm paraphrasing here, but he said something along the lines of, Leone made a fantastic movie, but it was my movie.
That's interesting.
And the Toho Studios actually sued Leone and his people. I'm not sure who the exact plaintiffs were in the case, but they settled out of court for like $100,000 or something like that for what would you call it? It's cultural property, something like that. Intellectual property.
Yeah, intellectual property.
The reason I like this as an adaptation so much, or whatever you want to call it legally, is that it feels like another revision of the script from Yojimbo, and they made some changes to the characters and stuff, but they also made this major change that instead of saying it in 1860s Japan, they're going to set it in the late 1800s Mexico, or late 1900s Mexico. No, late 1800s Mexico. Sorry.
Should say the Wild West.
Yeah, the Wild West. They set it in the Wild West. And so it still has the heart of the film, but with new adaptations that make it feel a little different and make it feel like the same story in a different location. And they emphasize different parts of the film, but without losing what made the characters interesting or what made the story interesting. They kept the traits of the protagonist, the no-name protagonist, who's a tough guy with a secret heart of gold, but is still really good at killing people. And the two rival gangs were super interesting still. They just added to it without subtracting any of the good stuff from before. And they got sued in the process, but still, it's a good movie.
Yeah, and if we're going to talk specifically comparing A Fistful of Dollars to The Magnificent Seven as far as a Kurosawa remake goes, I think what you were saying is right, that each change felt like an addition to the story and not like, oh, let's do something different and see if this works. Because I think Magnificent Seven did that for certain things, like combining the misfit character and the young character that I don't think added to the story as much as just felt like they needed to change something. And also, the Magnificent Seven felt a little bit more like cookie cutter Hollywood Western film kind of a setup. I mean, Magnificent Seven is a fine film. It's a good Western and all that, but Sergio Leone just has something stylistically that he puts in A Fistful of Dollars and all of his subsequent films that make him, the king of Western films. I think he's still probably the best director who's ever made Western films because he just has such a vision and combine him with his Ennio Morricone scores and all of that. It gives a feeling that you come away from A Fistful of Dollars kind of just drenched in this feeling that, man, the Wild West was really cool, kind of a thing.
Right.
And so it's those little touches. And the other thing is that he, like you were saying, he understood what Yojimbo was going for. He understood the story really deeply and was able to just build on it as opposed to changing things for the sake of making something different.
For sure. And I don't think we can mention this without explaining what a spaghetti western is, because we definitely teased that earlier in the episode. But a spaghetti western is an interesting subgenre of western that typically featured Italian crew members and a
director.
Director, especially director, Sergio Leone, very Italian. But the cast would be an international cast. They would be a mix of American actors and Italian actors and Spanish actors and German actors. And on set, they would all just speak their own languages whenever they recorded. And this is typically how it was done. It wasn't done on every single film, but this is definitely how it was done on A Fistful of Dollars. So when it was recorded, each actor is speaking in his native language, but then it's overdubbed for re-release in each country. And most of these films tended to be released first in Italy and then America, and that's definitely the case with A Fistful of Dollars. So when you watch this movie and you're wondering why the little kid's voice is so annoying,
and doesn't match his lips.
Dubbed. It doesn't match his lips at all. I think if I can just nitpick anything about A Fistful of Dollars, that's it. Is that the kid is super annoying because of the dub.
Mama.
Oh gosh. Oh, it's the worst. It feels like an adult man trying to sound like a child when it's recorded, and it just doesn't work. But the rest is great. Don't get me wrong. Great film. Just silence those dubs on the kids, and perfect film.
Yeah, absolutely. And spaghetti westerns were mostly like if you look up spaghetti westerns, most of the ones you're gonna find are by Sergio Leone, but there are several. There were really just a handful of Italian directors that kind of defined this genre, but they did it so well that it has become kind of ingrained in the Hollywood genre system. So like Sergio Corbucci, who did films like The Great Silence and Django, not Django Unchained.
No, the original Django, on which many Djangos are based.
Yeah, and then there's also Sergio Solima, The Big Gun Down, lots of Sergios, and some others. You can look it up, but it was really this interesting niche of filmmaker, Italian filmmakers working in one genre that all did it really well and kind of earned their place in cinema history.
Yeah. I kind of like the idea of it being a rule that if you're an Italian director named Sergio, you have to do spaghetti westerns.
Yeah.
Like they don't give you a choice. Like if you walk into film school on day one, they're like, oh, go to the western department. Which they don't have genre departments, but like it might. That just seems cool to me.
Also, fun fact, I'm pretty sure I heard this somewhere, but I think in Eastern countries like China, the spaghetti westerns are actually called macaroni westerns.
Oh, really?
I think so.
Why?
I don't know. Someone fact check me on that, but
I mean,
that would be
is another Italian noodle, so
yeah.
It works, but maybe they just like macaroni. But I mean, I like macaroni better than spaghetti, so fair enough. Hey, China has the right idea on that one.
Maybe you just start calling them macaroni westerns. We'll bring it over.
Maybe I will. And all our listeners will be really confused. So yeah, if you think about it, this is really impressive to have two films, one based on the other, but both made by master filmmakers, and both ended up being classics in their own right. And I think they work fantastically as a double feature. If you're ever interested in cooking up a double feature for yourself,
absolutely,
go here, because two classics back to back, it doesn't get much better than Yojimbo and A Fistful of Dollars.
Very different, very similar. But remember kids, always ask before plagiarizing. But if you do it right and you can pay for it, you just might earn international fame and fortune.
Right. Just, make sure you have well, nowadays it'd be a couple mil lying around.
Yeah, nowadays.
Be careful. Okay. So let's talk about our coming attractions, what we're going to talk about next week.
And it's delicious.
It is delicious. The director, Edgar Wright, pretty famous for his Cornetto trilogy, as well as Scott Pilgrim versus the World, and we're going to be talking about the Cornetto trilogy. So, Shaun of the Dead from 2004, Hot Fuzz from 2007, and The World's End from 2013. And if you're wondering why I'm calling it the Cornetto trilogy, like I did for so long before asking, the answer is that there's an ice cream called Cornetto ice cream in each of the films. And even though they're not officially trilogies, it's not an official trilogy, a lot of fans tend to group it together.
Yeah, so the other thing that connects all three of these films are the leads of Simon Pegg and Nick Frost. So they each are two buddies in all three of these films in very different situations. And then people found the ice cream thread, so that's kind of more catchy than the Simon Pegg, Nick Frost trilogy.
It rolls off the tongue better.
And Hot Fuzz is available on Netflix for anyone watching along. And check out the other two because they are great, and they're great to watch together.
For sure. And don't forget that we are going to be posting our monthly Twitter poll on our Twitters this week. And that is for you guys to pick what you guys want us to do for an episode. We want to get your thoughts on a topic, and we're going to be covering what this poll, Jonathan?
This poll will be trilogies. So we're going to put up 4 trilogies, and y'all tell us what you want us to watch and talk about.
Right on. Well, that's about all the time we have for this episode.
If you have movie suggestions for us or just want to reach out, I can be found on Twitter at @JSSatchel.
And I'm at Alex Garinger.
And to find links to things that we talked about today, you can view them on the blog at thefilmlings.wordpress.com.
If you like the show, let us know. Leave us a review on iTunes so other people know what we're all about.
We definitely appreciate it.
Talk to you next week.
All right, see ya.